The father of the Public Service Commission is a man by the name of Robert M. La Follette. Fighting Bob, as he was known in his day, was a Wisconsin politician and lawyer. And in 1905, he was the governor of Wisconsin and signed into law one of the first pieces of legislation to establish a Public Service Commission. Now, this idea of creating a separate body to govern utilities had been floating around jurisdictions for a few years. And in fact, some people argue that New York State was the first jurisdiction to stand up a Public Service Commission. But Wisconsin is unique because in 1907, the 1905 law was expanded to include all public utilities. And this was a sea change. And that 1907 law required a few things. It required a commission to determine the valuation for rate-making purposes of utility property, to be informed of all utility construction, to prescribe mandatory uniform systems of accounts, to provide examinations and audits, and to keep itself informed of the conduct of utility management. Fast forward today, and the authorizing statute for our commission in the District of Columbia isn't really that different. In fact, if you look at our mission statement, you'll see that we're charged with carrying out some of the same duties. And I'll tell you that this is not by accident, because Fighting Bob got himself elected to the United States Senate to represent Wisconsin. And when he came here, he was appointed to the committee that has oversight for the district. And in 1913, he was instrumental in passing the legislation that created our commission. So that's why we call Fighting Bob the father of the Public Service Commission. But we're here to talk today about the products of regulation. So what are the products? A product is really the decision that a regulator makes that will help guide or instruct a utility in order to do what the commission wants it to do, and that is in serving the public interest. The products of regulation really do two things. One, it describes what types of activities a utility can or is required to do. And two, it determines how they're compensated for that service. Traditionally, if you talk about the big groups, the big categories of regulatory products, there are three. One, generation, two, transmission, and three, distribution. Generation is really the creation of energy, whether it be electricity, natural gas, or even telecommunications. Transmission is the physical transportation of that energy that's created, usually sometimes from a long distance, to distribution centers. In distribution, this is where the local utility comes in. This is the actual work of billing, metering, measuring, entering into purchase power agreements for contracting for power. That is distribution service that happens over local distribution lines. One other important concept to understand from the outset is that in the late 70s, as a result to an energy crisis in the United States, local, state, and federal governments looked to change the way utilities were regulated, and they introduced something called competition. So not only did you have the traditional vertically integrated utilities that were regulated by commissions, policymakers decided that they would allow new entrants to come in and actually compete with these utilities in order to address price concerns, fuel concerns, and other matters. This, for us in the District of Columbia, we're considered a restructured jurisdiction. We no longer have vertically integrated utilities. Instead, we have retail competition. More about that later. The one thing I want you to keep in mind as we move forward, the one thing that has been a constant throughout the 20th century as we developed utility regulation, is the public interest standard. The public interest standard is what drives the work of the commission. It is basically the balancing of all of the interests of all of the stakeholders in any particular proceeding in order to come up with a reasonable determination to serve the public. I break that down like this, the 3 Ps. That's policy, price, and people. It is through the prism of the 3 Ps that we will explore the products of utility regulation. Let's talk about policy. The importance of utility policy is that it is the mechanism by which commissions can guide the activity of a utility, and it helps define the role of the utility in the daily lives of the people, as well as the local economy. Some people call this relationship the principal-agent model. That is, the commission is the principal, and the utility is the agent. The commission directs, usually through orders, a certain activity that they want the utility to do in service of the customer. Now you may ask yourself, why would a utility, especially a private utility, ever subject itself to the authority of the commission? To understand that, I think you have to think about the regulatory compact. The regulatory compact is really where you have a franchise that is granted to a particular utility to provide monopoly service in a jurisdiction. Now, in exchange for this grant of a franchise, the utility then agrees that it will not exercise monopoly power over its consumers. That is, charge the highest possible price that you can, that the market will bear for the service that you provide your constituents or your consumers. And there's one more important part. If you do all this under the regulatory compact, the commission will allow you a guaranteed rate of return for your service. It's a sure bet for the utility. So that's why the utility would agree to be governed by a public service commission. And under this traditional regulatory model, it is based upon a system of centralized generation that's usually fossil fuels or nuclear power plants that are providing power, energy, whatever service that you have to customers in the distribution area. This is done over power lines or pipelines. And what you call this whole system is the grid, the energy grid. Now, the Public Service Commission has a say in how this energy grid is built out. In particular, it is a requirement for all commissions to, as we talked about in the beginning, to regulate construction of new power plants and assets. This infrastructure investment is huge. In the District of Columbia alone, we have over $4 billion of infrastructure investment activities going on with our utilities right now. And this same thing is happening all over the country for different reasons. But the process through which the utility is authorized permission to build something starts with a notice of construction. This notice of construction is prescribed in our regulations, and it gives you specific rules, specific items that must be included in any application. This includes describing what you want to be built, the economics of the projects. Also, it may include what the benefit is to the local community as well as the people. The Public Service Commission and its staff will review this application for a notice of construction, and if it decides favorably, it will issue, and this is a product, a notice of convenience and necessity. And once and not until you have this notice of convenience and necessity, can a utility move forward with a construction project. Another related issue to infrastructure investment is interconnection. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of jurisdictions are restructured and we allow competition. So interconnection standards is really the process, and this is approved by the commission. It lays out the technical, procedural, the rules, the pricing, everything that's involved with a customer or a generation facility connecting to the electric grid or the natural gas grid. There's also telecommunications interconnection standards as well. Quality of service standards is another policy consideration for commissions. Commissions, they generally have quality of service standards to ensure that the service that is provided is safe, reliable, and it also meets the standards for whatever the Public Utility Commission sets for its jurisdiction. Utilities are generally required to file either quarterly and or annually reports detailing how they comply with these quality of service standards. This also includes, again, telecommunications, natural gas, and electric service. Under telecommunications, they actually can have quality of service standards even just for emergency 911 service, as well as local landlines, although generally you will not have a Public Service Commission have quality service standards for broadband. The final policy consideration that we'll talk about today is climate change. Many jurisdictions recognize that climate change is real and that we have taken steps, both legislatively and regulatorily, to address the long-term impacts of climate change on our constituents. In the District of Columbia, we have a goal to have 100% renewable energy by 2032. We also are looking to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% of 2006 levels by 2050 and also achieve carbon neutrality. The Commission's role in all of this is that we monitor the portfolio of renewable energy for our utilities. This is called a Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS. And under this regulatory scheme, you have specific renewable energy resources that are detailed in the regulation. And they're usually something like solar, wind, geothermal, and they can be different tiers. And you phase them in percentage-wise over the horizon of like 10 years. Public utilities are then required to certify that the required percentage, say 25% or 30% of their utility mix comes from renewable resources. And then the Public Service Commission reports that information to the legislative body that has oversight for it. Now, we just talked about policy. Let's talk about prices. It won't surprise anyone that prices is one of the most important products of any utility commission. It is through prices that commissions help determine and guide cost recovery, including incentives provided to utilities to do what the commission wants them to do. We do this through a process called rate making. Now, this is a very complex and detailed process. In fact, I want to warn anyone watching this right now that this is not a substitute for a rate making class. And so don't view this course, don't view this lecture as teaching you everything you need to know about rate making. But we will step through the elements of rate making very quickly. Before we begin, I do want to read to you a quote from one of the chairs of the Public Service Commission in DC. And he said, "It comes down to this question. How much profit should the commission allow a utility to earn in order for it to be able to sell its shares in the marketplace to raise the capital it needs to provide its service? It's a matter of judgment, and you need a human being or 3 human beings to do it." The process of rate making and rate case proceedings has been increasing. The Energy Information Administration reported that in 2018, they saw the largest increase of rate cases being filed with commissions since 1983. And we know from our policy discussion that in the early 1980s, there was actually an energy crisis in the United States. So what is the crisis today? I believe that we're now seeing the result of the energy transformation that we've seen being captured in rates, and Commissions are being confronted by utilities in order to seek recovery for those costs. That includes everything from grid modernization, replacing aging infrastructure, investing in distributed energy resources. There's been an increase in storms, so you see more costs related to storm recovery and new billing systems in order to do all of the many things that we want the commission, that the commission might want a utility to do. An important part of this is rate design. And you can't talk about rate design without also talking about cost of service regulation. And there's a formula that I want to share with you, and we'll step through it real quickly. That's revenue requirement equals operating expenses plus rate base times rate of return. Regulators determine the revenue requirement, i.e. the cost of service, that reflects the total amount that must be collected in rates for the utility to recover its cost and earn a reasonable return. Cost of service studies determine the total costs incurred by a utility in providing service to its customers and the allocation of those costs to a customer class. Rate base is the net amount of investment funded by investors in utility plant and other assets devoted to the rendering of utility service upon which reasonable rate of return can be earned. The rate of return is the percentage rate which the commission finds should be earned on the rate base in order to recover the cost of capital. And finally, allowable operating expenses include operation and maintenance costs, O&M, depreciation, and all related taxes. Again, that formula is revenue requirement equals operating expenses plus rate base times rate of return. So once you have a rate set by a commission, how do you get that information to the public? This is done through a filing that the utility makes with the commission, and it's called a tariff. Let's look at an example of a tariff. A tariff lays out the terms and conditions of service and commission reviewed filings. Again, this is like the price tag that you put on what the service of a utility will be. Now, once you have that price tag set, there are other different rate making tariffs, or for instance, a time of use tariff is a certain type of tariff, and that comes under the umbrella of dynamic pricing. So dynamic pricing essentially sends a signal to the customer to tell them when you want them to use energy. And at all times, you want to make sure that the system is balanced, that you have supply that meets demand. And so if you think that you're going to exceed your supply with the demand, you may want to tell someone, for example, who has an electric vehicle, that you don't want them charging that electric vehicle at the peak, in the middle of the day, when everybody's at work. You may want them to do it at night when everybody's asleep. And so you make the cost for charging an EV higher at the peak and cheaper when there's a surplus of supply. Another price consideration is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is, you've heard the saying, the cheapest megawatt is the one that you don't use. And so commissions realize that utilities earn their return basically on building larger and larger facilities, plants, and assets, and charging for more and more volume of service. But during the 1970s, the policy considerations wanted to limit how much the economies of scale for building larger plants had exhausted. So we need to look for alternatives to building new plants. At this point, commissions turns to energy efficiency. And there are really three different things that commissions like to do to encourage utilities to do energy efficiency. The first one is to separate how utilities make money from selling more energy. This is called decoupling. You separate the motive to have profit from just selling more energy. The next thing you want to do is make sure that there's a mechanism for utilities to recover the costs that they invest in energy efficiency, to make sure that that is taken into account. The last thing that you want to do is make sure that you provide the proper incentive for utilities to, in fact, go out and sell less power and to create opportunities for energy efficiency. In the District of Columbia, we actually set up a third party to handle almost all of the energy efficiency work in the district. It's called a sustainable energy utility. And this is a contract that's set up through a utility that goes out and they have benchmarks, they have metrics that they have to hit every year to help us improve our energy efficiency and improve the reliability of our system. You also have to take into consideration discount programs. You have low-income discount programs, you may have senior citizen discounts, or even for disabled citizens. These are very important ways through pricing that we're allowing utilities to help consumers who may need a little bit of help. There are also different alternative forms of regulation. You've seen this for some time in places like Hawaii and also in the District of Columbia, where we are looking at a performance-based rate-making proceeding right now. And I won't go into the details of PBR, but I will tell you what experts say. It could be a way to further incentivize utilities to do the things that you want them to do as a policy matter. That includes grid modernization, renewable energy resources, all of these types of new and innovative ideas. PBR is a way to achieve that. Now, we've talked about policy, we've talked about pricing. Let's talk about people. When you mention people in a regulatory context, what you're really talking about are the stakeholders, in particular, the stakeholders of any proceeding. That includes a public advocate, Office of People's Counsel, the legislature, the Attorney General, the parties, businesses, residential customers, everyone who's impacted by the products that we've been talking about are included in the people. But the thing I want to focus on is the consumer. And consumers are not only just people who consume energy. That definition has begun to change. You now have something called a prosumer, someone who not only consumes, but produces their own energy. 20 years ago, it was the most unusual thing to see solar panels or PV on the rooftop of a home. Now it's becoming more and more commonplace. And that creates complexities for the Utility Commission as they govern the work of the utility. Now, I mentioned solar power because renewable generation and penetration can be a very big deal when you talk about people. You have products such as net energy metering and community solar. These are relatively new mechanisms that Utility Commission can use to encourage people to have solar power. You also have demand response is another way that customers can participate with the utility that they may not have in the past. In order to do this, you have to make sure that you properly invest to allow the customer to have on their appliance, on their home, on their meter, some way to lower their load in the event there's a reliability event and the utility or the commission or the RTO, the regional transmission operator, determines that for reliability purposes, we need to lower the load in a particular jurisdiction. Finally, education and consumer complaints. This is a big part of the regulatory product that the Commission provides to people. If you have a complaint with your bill, if you have an issue paying your bill, you can come to the Public Service Commission and we can help you. We can negotiate on your behalf as a go-between between you and the utility to help come out with some type of compromise. We can set you up on a payment plan. Or if you need an upgrade on your system and there's a dispute about the pricing, these are the types of issues that we can have an ALJ process. And in that process, It's like a mini trial, which ultimately, if it's still not a satisfactory outcome for the customer, they can appeal that decision to the Public Service Commission, and we will issue an order in your case. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what the future of the products of utility regulation look like. And I bring this up under people because grid modernization is something that utility commissions have done as a result of the call from the people. The purpose of grid modernization is to research and investigate the technologies that will help modernize the energy delivery system for a particular jurisdiction. We did this through engaging our stakeholders. We had a working group process in the District of Columbia where we brought in a consultant. And over a 9-month period, we had over 250 individual participants, over 50 working group meetings addressing 6 defined issues, everything from pilot projects to electric vehicles, microgrids, data access, and protection. These are all subjects that the Public Service Commission received recommendations from our working group. And then we acted on those to set up what I like to call a roadmap, which will guide the work of the commission and grid modernization for the next decade. In the wake of the COVID-19 global pandemic, consumer education has become more and more important. At the Public Service Commission District of Columbia, we've launched several campaigns. Chief among them is the Here to Help DC campaign. This is a coalition of district agencies that govern constituents that involve energy. In the Here to Help DC campaign, we're trying to see around the corner. We're proud that our legislature stepped in early on to put a stop to all disconnections and any fees related to non-bill payment. But we also realize that there are many people hurting right now. And so when it comes to the end of the moratoriums, we're looking at what resources are available to help those people that may be in financial trouble. We're also looking to make sure people know their rights, that they know they can't be disconnected during a global health pandemic. And we're out in the community giving people tips on how to conserve energy, as well as what they need to do if they get in trouble and how to negotiate with their utility. Other campaigns that we have to educate our consumers include our Fight Utility Scams campaign. We know that more and more people are working at home, and so there's more opportunity to interact with bad parties and bad actors. These folks are trying to do one thing and one thing only, and that's separate your consumers from their money. And so if you go to our fightutiliscams.com website, you'll see a step-by-step set of instructions on how you should interact with someone if you suspect that they're offering you some type of scam. We also have our Winter Ready DC program. This is an annual program where we work with community leaders to make sure that they have the information they need to relate to their constituents on how people can prepare their homes for winter, how they can also save money, and some of the discount programs that are available to consumers. These consumer education products are essential to the work of the Commission.
We resolve and mediate consumer complaints. I consider that our core function. But we also educate through outreach, and then we also inform the public about the official acts of the Commission through our relationships with the media and public information.
We are constantly engaging the community. We're looking for feedback and new ideas and opportunities to listen and hear from our district residents, our ratepayers, our stakeholders.
So, to conclude, when you think back to 1905 with Fighting Bob, when he set up one of the first utility commissions, there's no way that he would have known that we would still be using the framework that he set out. But the truth is, if there wasn't a Public Service Commission, you'd have to invent it, because it is the Public Service Commission that stands at the intersection of what the utility wants to do, what consumers want to do, and what is prudent. I thank you for your time.